This little edition of Trucker Talk is for a person named Charlie, whose account I follow here on Instagram. Hi Charlie, my name is Gretchen. Have spent the last couple weeks thinking about the story query that you put up. The question was a loaded one. Basically revolving around issues of identity, respect, and boundaries. Things that I've been thinking about a lot myself anyway, and I happen to have a job where I have a lot of time to think. This is my fifth year in my fourth career as an over-the-road truck driver, but my first career was as a clothing designer, and I still even kind of see back there I've got all my sewing projects going on, and I love New York street fashion. Like for my 21st birthday, I put on this really badass outfit that I made for myself and walked from Harlem all the way down to the Lower East Side. That was all I wanted to do, was be out on the street rocking my duds. So anyway, I've had some time to put some thought into your question, and certainly wasn't just going to ambush you like the other however many people did. So I'm going to see if I can share some of my thoughts on the matter. When it comes to identity, I'm 43 years old now, but definitely when I was throughout my life, I've had a lot of work to do related to creating enough space between myself and the world around me in order to nurture the space within myself to examine identity. To put it simply, I feel like we sort of have these two parts of our awareness which inform our experience of who we are and our identity. One is this higher sense of self, which can be very misguided based on how much we allow our ego or our persona, or the part of us that has to interact with the outside world, to be consumed by that activity. I feel like our higher self can see very far. It has greater powers of discernment, but really cannot take action, and a lot of times ends up being subordinate to the part of ourself which I would call our ego or our persona, which has to interact with the outside world, mediate with the outside world, present. And that process in general of being an individual in the world is one, it's generally adversarial. Generally, we have to be on the defensive. And I think that can lead to a lot of the reasons why people are willing to hitch what they perceive to be their identity to outside factors, whether it's your sports team or your religion or your family or the city that you're from, or or even getting down to more fundamental things like your gender. It's a lot easier to deal with people if you present something that they don't have to either defend against or negotiate with, because ultimately, if you're able to establish some kind of a stable relationship with the world around you that is stable in terms of dependable, healthy or not, it's not the question, that gives you more space inside of yourself to engage in the process of self-discovery, and that really just comes from allowing your higher self to witness and then speak to your ego and your persona, so that you can take more proactive agency in your life rather than reactive agency. But also that the defensive and the adversarial process that we're sort of always engaged with the world around us, it makes us more prone to be defensive or offensive with others, and then also our internal dialogue can get very critical and very demanding. I mean, the voice of our higher self is essentially very demanding, and so it's a process that really is very personal to each one of us individually. By being able to rather than defending ourselves against the outside world, if we're able to defend ourselves against ourselves, we are able to, hopefully, what my personal goal is to be able to interrogate myself in a kinder way, in a more generous way, so that I'm able to address especially like cognitive biases, or because it's a good thing when people challenge us and challenge what we're presenting to them, because it's very, very easy for people to fall into magical thinking, really twisted, one-sided thinking, paranoia, and slipping into stages of psychosis where, you really are out of step and out of alignment with what could be considered a consensual reality with other people. It's a real slippery slope, and it's real steep. So one thing I've learned, especially from driving around the whole country at this job that I have, and our identities can either be the gateway into that slippery slope, like where people really get involved in, paranoia and conspiracy theories and psychosis, or it can, lead to, identities of people executing elements of what might be called mass psychosis, or really imposing and being oppressive to other people because, for no other reason than it just challenges the group identity. Because really, when it comes right down to it, like, we say that among society, you want to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that really is kind of as good as it's going to get, I think, with just anybody in general. There are 8 billion people in the world, and we're not going to get along with all of them. And, we're not even going to like all of them. And you don't know that you don't like somebody until you actually get to know them. I mean, if you're going around not liking people just based on superficial things, you're a bigot. But, to have the stamina and the courage and the openness to get to know people on their own terms and enter into the possibility of what I would say is respect, which is being in a position where you can treat another person as they ask to be treated. And oftentimes that involves some negotiation, because people may have requests and demands and needs that they're making that they're not even aware of, because they're not listening to their higher self. They don't have a solid relationship within themselves to interrogate what their needs are and what their motivations are. So that's always a lot of give and take, and where the ability to operate in a framework of boundaries really comes in. And speaking to that, like, most of the imposition I've had to deal with people in terms of my identity and respect and boundaries has come primarily from people with substance abuse problems. And there's one particular phrase from that, I would call it a science, that has helped me the most in my own life and in dealing with other people, is a concept called terminal uniqueness. The idea that, we all have these biases, and we all have reasons for doing the things that we are doing, and we all justify ourselves in some way to say, I am special for this reason, and therefore the rules don't apply to me, and accommodations need to be made. And with an addicted person, it's the addiction that is really running the show. The thing is more important than the people, which is something that you really have to learn when you're like really young. Like when I was raising my son, I realized when he was about 8 or 9 that was a part of my responsibility as a parent, was to give him a separate understanding of how to operate in the world in terms of things and executing his goals and his ambitions, with objects and, plans that he could have some sense of, reliable interaction with. And things are different than people. People, you need, in interacting with people, you need to have the ability to think about what you feel and have feelings about your thoughts, and recognize that they're not always going to be congruent, that that's true for anyone that you're interacting with, and to be able to have enough patience and leeway to engage in that kind of internal process and internal dialogue, and then therefore with other people. And with people who are in a state of addiction, they're always, the idea of terminal uniqueness is that whole I'm special, the rules don't apply to me, and this is why the exception applies. It is terminal because that uniqueness eventually will absolutely run up against a brick wall where the world will not make accommodations for you anymore. That's when life becomes unmanageable, when all of these little exterior signs that there's incongruency between how a person's trying to operate in the world and get their needs met, and the accommodations that can be made reasonably by the world, by other people, by society or the system, or whatever you can say. That whole concept has really helped me come to a place of interrogating my own desire for uniqueness and specialness, because I mean, that's one of the basic needs that we have, is to be valuable, to be unique and special, to have an enjoyment of our uniqueness and brilliance, that this happens to be our precious little life, and if we have the ability to spend as much time as possible cultivating and developing that part of ourself, it really truly is a blessing. And so when I think about what tools there are to really respond when there is incongruence, when maybe the things that you're asking for and the accommodations that you're asking for are somewhat objectively reasonable, and you've evaluated people as far as their criteria to have entrance and access to your life, and they are not able to negotiate boundaries. The fewer rules the better, because the more rules you have, the more you're going to have to enforce. And really the only enforcement mechanism we have when it comes down to other people is just to back up. If somebody is obdurate and they are not willing to negotiate, they're not willing to abide by agreements that are made, it's arrogant to continue to try to impose your own sense of, I'm special and you need to accommodate me for these reasons. If somebody's just really not going to do it, there's a lot more harm to be done by continuing to push, or by continuing to allow people to violate your boundaries and your preferences. And really the only thing that you can reasonably do is back up. It's been helpful to me to realize how painful that is, because it comes in, it involves a sense of betrayal of myself, that I would even allow myself to get into a situation where I would be treated this way. And so the thing that I've learned over the last couple years, really especially, to really look for is kind of the idea of manners. And I don't mean manners in terms of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I really do mean like a higher sense of manners in terms of respect. And I'll just kind of give a really simple example. Just people can operate with a lot of superficial charm and employ manners to do that. But that's a lot different than being truly conscientious, because developing a part of myself that is able to put the awareness into being conscientious, it's not as much about ambition, it's more about preventing problems. There's a big difference between somebody holding the door open for you and looking around the corner to make sure that there's nobody else coming before you go barreling around in anticipation that there might be somebody there. There's a big difference between trying to do the best that you can to be conscientious and thorough in order to prevent problems, as opposed to trying to be outstanding. And sometimes it can be a really fine line. So when I'm really watching how people behave and giving them enough time and space to just be who it is that they're going to be, so that I can observe and discern about who they present themselves to be without making a lot of assumptions about what's going on in their inner world, it can be and has been a very useful tool for deciding if I'm going to allow somebody to have access to me and interrupt the negotiation that's always happening inside of myself between my higher self and my persona or my ego, or who I'm experiencing myself as, because that's a precious relationship. And if I see that somebody really can conduct themselves with a sense of conscientious good manners, I know that they are also engaged in that work in themselves, because you have to have a certain amount of space and peace and harmony and undefended time inside of yourself, because it takes up a lot of energy to be on the lookout and be defensive and on guard and offensive and constantly having to assert yourself. There's only so much time and energy in our day, in our lives. And if somebody is constantly dealing with all of that inside of themselves, they're not even going to have the resources to look around and see what could be done in a more smooth and effective and efficient and respectful and conscientious manner. So those are just some of my thoughts, and I appreciate you posting your question.